Hello and welcome to RPGMD, a resource dedicated to writing you a prescription for all things dice, dragons, and gaming. Today we're going to be looking at high-level spellcasting, and when I say that, I don't just mean 9th level. So 9th level is extremely powerful magic. We're talking about the ability to call down meteors, to wish for absolutely anything you could hope for. So I understand that most people are okay with this and don't wish for even more. But what happens for those of us who aren't just okay with the ability to wish for things, but rather want more devastating power? Imagine not only being able to annihilate an entire city with a meteor storm, but an entire continent. Is casting over 9th level magic even possible in 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons? And is there a means or official rules in which to do so? In today's video, we'll find out. In short, yes and no. No, there is no extra special hidden supplement that says in 5th edition and at level 20 you get a 10th level spell slot that you can use to cast a specific spell every day like you do with your other spell levels. However, there is precedent for casting very long-timed research spells, but there are no official sources that say what these spells are, so it's going to require a little bit of creativity, a little bit of leniency from your DM, and a very, very experienced party. To give you a little bit of history where this kind of magic is based off of, we need to look back at previous editions of Dungeons & Dragons, and most specifically 3.5, as they released a book called the Epic Level Handbook that dealt with these kinds of issues and kind of how to progress your character past level 20. And there are many, many what they call epic level spells that are past that 9th level spell slot that we're used to in 5th edition. In 3.5, epic levels was a term used to describe any character who is able to progress to the 21st level, which is not something we are currently able to do in 5th edition. There were epic feats, epic items, and most importantly for this video, epic level spells. Epic level spells were not supposed to have a spell level in 3.5, but were deemed mechanically 10th level spells. And with that, they got a couple of special privileges. The first being that they could be cast in an anti-magic shield if a certain DC was passed. The second was that they could not be imbued into magical items, at least by players. And the third is that Counterspell actually did not work on them unless it was the epic level spell, Epic Counterspell. Now, the power of these different epic spells actually varied pretty widely, and your ability to cast them or research them was based mostly off of a DC spellcraft, which is not a skill that we have in 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons, and I guess the closest thing would kind of be Arcana, but there's no direct comparison here. Now, to give you an example of how much of a difference we're talking here, you could take anything such as Dragon Strike, which summons 10 red dragons to attack your enemy for 20 rounds, to something more protective like Eternal Freedom, which made you forever immune to stuns, holds, or stasis, to something like Time Duplicate that brings a future version of yourself into the battle with yourself, or something with an extremely long cast time and radius like Dire Winter, which creates a 1,000 radius area of winter that does 2d6 for 20 hours. Now, as cool as these spells were, it was not as easy as going into the Epic Handbook and saying, that's awesome, I want that one. No. As stated previously, you had to pass a DC spellcraft to even learn to research it. And then you had to research it, which requires not only a certain amount of time, but also immense, very expensive spell components, often hundreds of thousands of just pure gold pieces. And then, again, you had to invest experience points as well, making the decision to take a spell a very, very important one. As an example, let's take a look at the 3.5 epic level spell, Dragon Strike. As stated previously, this is going to cause 10 red dragons to appear for 20 rounds to attack your enemy. And to do this, you actually are going to need to research the spell initially, and the costs for that are going to be 490,000 gold pieces, 9 days, and 18,000 EXP, in addition to some other magical components that you'll have to buy and or gather. Additionally, if that wasn't enough, you actually need to pass a DC 240 spellcraft check, which, if you're saying that is impossible for one character to roll, you are correct. And how someone would get around this is actually the DC will be decreased based off the number of people who help you cast this spell by using a 9th level spell slot. With 11 casters, and that's right, you heard me correctly, 11 casters, you can get this DC down to about 53. And even though there are 11 casters there, that is still an almost impossible roll. So to get it down even further, you actually need to spend 2,000 EXP per cast to lower that even further. And that is going to be every single one of those 11 people can spend that 2,000 to basically get it down to a guaranteed roll that you're going to succeed on the spell. Now, before you guys go writing in the comments, RPGMD, this is crazy, this is expensive, this is time consuming, why would my character ever want to do anything like this in 5th edition? Let me at least just go through how much damage this is going to do, and also allow me to ease your fears that a lot of the cost is going to be that initial research, which requires all the gold pieces and everything, and then the subsequent casts are just going to be that lower EXP and the spell components. So what do we get if we summon 10 red dragons? Well, the spell does say that all 10 dragons will simultaneously breathe fire on the target, and by my calculations, by cross-referencing the 3.5 monster manual, that was about 180 d10 in one round, not to mention the 19 other rounds where they could do the exact same thing. Now, if you're a 5th edition player, stick with me, because I promise this whole video is not about 3.5, because now we're going to discuss, is it even likely that this kind of system is going to come? And my answer to that is likely yes. I would say that 5th edition is one of the more successful editions of Dungeons & Dragons, and as it continues to get older and expand with more supplements like Xanathar's Guide, there may come a point where we reach this epic level system for progressing our characters past 20, and I would imagine they would do something similar, as this is something that's been done in both 3.5 and 2nd edition before. Now, there are a couple of in-game lore reasons as to why we're not able to cast high-level magic anymore either, and those consist of the Spell Plague, which is kind of a long story that they came up with to explain the changes that they made in 4th edition, but also an older story, that of Karsus's Avatar. Karsus's Avatar is actually the only known 12th level spell in the history of Dungeons & Dragons, and it is the story of a Netheril mage, which is a very ancient, very magical civilization, who wanted to win a war by embodying the goddess of magic herself and kind of forcing her power into him for a limited number of time. It was a spell so complex that it took him over a decade to research it, required magical components that consisted of Tarrasque's blood, 12-headed Hydra bile, and the gizzard of a gold dragon. The casting time of this spell was over 6 hours, and the spell was actually successful, allowing Karsus to embody Mistral, who immediately killed herself, ending all magic on the plane and the downfall of the Netheril Empire. Now, Mistral was reborn as Mistra, who is still present in 5th edition, but it's for this reason that spell slots were enabled, as Mistra, the new goddess of magic, put many more restrictions that did not used to exist in Dungeons & Dragons in terms of magical spell use, so that no one could attempt to do this level of magic ever again. Bringing it back to 5th edition again, how can we change these rules to bring them into your game specifically? And I would say that it is indeed possible to start introducing these higher level spells into your game if you and your players highly desire it. The question is going to be, is what is it going to take and what is the spell that you want to do? And 3.5 does offer us a wide variety of spells that can kind of inspire it, but I would say your creativity is the limit here. If you want to make a spell that turns back time, go for it. If you want to make a magical underwater kingdom of your own, absolutely. The real question here is going to be, can you afford it? Can you find enough high-level spellcasters to help you with it? And is your DM willing to do this for you? Obviously, whether you're a DM or whether you're a player, this is a very large conversation to have with your Dungeon Master, and I would hope that these kinds of conversations only come up as a party is either nearing level 20 and wants to continue their adventure and really has nothing more to work towards, or at a party that has played for years and is starting at that high level. Another use that I found for these kinds of magic is, as a DM, kind of making it the motivation of your villain through a very long campaign setting. If you need something or some way to keep introducing the villain to your players, I would have his main motivation be one of these epic level spells. And perhaps the player characters run into him as he's trying to collect these different magical components but don't know why he's going to these places. And maybe the player characters are even killing these creatures that he needs without knowing that they're helping him. If you have more of a city-based campaign, perhaps that they are running into the villain who set up some kind of Ponzi scheme or greater business schema that is allowing him to fund these epic level spells that they need to put a stop to as well. All of this should kind of lead up to whatever grand confrontation you have with your villain, who is now able to cast this earth-changing spell of your choice, and making that final fight all that dramatic, either against the party or whatever motivates the villain in terms of maybe turning back time, etc. And that is actually going to wrap up our video on epic level magic in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. I know it's a little bit different than some of the other videos, but I hope you can take little bits and pieces out of this to kind of inspire new and creative uses for spellcasting in your campaigns. As always, feel free to like, favorite, and subscribe. I would greatly appreciate it. And thank you to anyone who's made it this far into my videos. You can catch any of the links to my previous videos over here or over here. And as always, I am RPGMD, bringing you a prescription for all things dice, dragons, and games.